Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Mining Media here on the Rainy Plays Games podcast, where we turn your movie marathons, your new book obsessions, your binging of TV shows into better gameplay experiences at your table. For the month of February, we are going to be leaning into that Valentine's Day holiday kind of theme, and we are talking this month on Mining Media about romance at the table and rom-coms. Rom-coms as the general genre of our media that we are going to be talking about in this one, and how you can learn a lot from rom-coms, and I'm probably going to bring in some romantasy from the book world and things like that that just might be a little relevant, but we'll see about that. Now, I want to preface this episode by saying romance does not need a place at every table, depending on the type of game you are playing with your friends, depending on your game group, depending on the themes that come up often or not in your games. Romance as a subgenre or subplots or anything like that needs to be discussed thoroughly with your GM and your players to understand if this is something that everybody wants at the table or not, and if it is, how to go about it in a safe, comfortable manner for everyone involved, not just the player who wants to have a romance subplot. Everyone else at the table needs to be aware of what that may entail and be comfortable with those themes and things coming up. I will also preface this by saying, if you have time before listening to this episode, I cannot recommend enough. There was a recent episode put out on the RPG Design Panelcast podcast with Magay Baker and Samphire Savage on leveling up your sexy game, and it is all about how to include and talk about sex in your games, and that includes romance, right? Romance is not always going to be this long, drawn-out will they, won't they. It's not always just going to be fade to black and end it there. There is a huge spectrum of what romantic behaviors and things look like at a table between characters. Every character is going to interpret things differently as far as what they care about, what they find romantic, what builds those connections and those relationships. So that was an incredible talk, and I saved that podcast episode for many, many future references. It's an excellent episode, so go listen to that if you get a chance. But now you can hear me kind of ramble about my thoughts on including romance at your games and what I got out of watching probably too many rom-coms in the last month. The first question we always ask in a mining media is, what games could do this well? And I'm here to say that technically just about any game can probably have a romance element to it, although some are better than others. I wouldn't recommend playing like a Warhammer 40k game where you're also doing some romance subplots, but there are games that are designed to have this sort of system built into it. I'm just going to list a bunch. Ready? Starcrossed, which you may have heard us play, my wife and I, on this podcast feed earlier this month. It's a game of two people who really, really want to, but really, really can't, so you get that romantic tension. There is Good Society, the Jane Austen RPG, that is all about life in a court, and there's many, many relationships that are important in that, many of which may become romantic. Similarly, Court of Blades by a Couple of Drakes is another Forged in the Dark game of romantic kind of court intrigue, political intrigue, and romance has a big part in that. There is Pasión de las Pasiones by Brandon Leon Gambetta. Listen to the Stop Hack and Roll podcast, it's great. And that is a telenovela RPG, so obviously you're going to get some spicy romance in there. And honestly, the flavor of romance in that game may not be the best to base your other romantic subplots around for your other games, because it is supposed to be explosive and messy because it's a telenovela. Blue Rose RPG from Green Ronin has a pretty good little section on romancing games between PCs, between a PC and an NPC, or just between NPCs. Speaking of Magay Baker earlier, Apocalypse World 2E has sex moves associated with each playbook, which I've heard a lot of people talk about as this interesting design thing, but really what it does is just based on your playbook, gives you a move that says, if you have sex as this character, you need to do this thing, because it's about how that playbook, that trope, as Powered by the Apocalypse playbooks are generally designed, is going to engage and be affected by or affect others when they have that moment of close intimacy, or however it's flavored. And I would say lastly, any game that deals with coming of age, because first loves are a very powerful form of romantic entanglement and learning for a lot of people. So games like Kids on Bikes would benefit a lot from maybe those first fumbles and experiences of good things that you may be looking for the rest of your life, or may generate the basis upon which you find you become romantically involved or interested in someone. Masks a new generation, doing that with superpowers? I mean, come on, there's vulnerabilities, there's weaknesses there. Monster Hearts, again, big asterisk on that one. The type of romance that's likely going to be involved in that game could be a little more emotionally charged and traumatic, but again, if it fits the theme and the genre of the game you're playing, it's probably a good place to look at and think about how they designed that game to play with these types of relationships and how they develop, if that's similar to what you're doing. So question number 2 is, what's gamifiable from rom-coms and romance, right? I would say a ton. Rom-coms typically have a lot of tropes that go into them, but they work really well not only in a movie or TV show, but they work at the table, I think, pretty well. But translating them from that type of very scripted, railroady story to something that you can engage with at a table over the course of a campaign is a little different. So one of my biggest pieces of advice is learn to love the relationship web. Make a relationship map between your characters and NPCs that they are meeting, and then make it messy. One of my favorite bits of advice that I did for research for this episode is from Pasión de las Pasiones' Principles. They have one that says, draw love as tangles, not lines. Like love triangles, that's overdone. Instead, make it complicated until it isn't. Frame scenes to explore relationships, show the characters' feelings, give them a chance to talk. These are all very good principles from Pasión de las Pasiones about exploring a budding romantic relationship between PCs, between a PC and an NPC. Maybe don't go into that much detail with NPC romances, but I do have a note about that later. But it's kind of one of those things where it should be messy, right? The option to pursue or engage with and build this romantic relationship should create an issue of time management. That's actually something that comes up in Blue Rose's notes. Depending on how much time the character is spending building this relationship, this romance, it's going to take time away from the goals that they are working on in an adventure or a quest or a mission or wherever. Similarly, Court of Blades has a paramour system for romance that puts the connection on a progress clock, like a lot of other Forged in the Dark games. And when that's filled, that relationship can now be tested with heat. It can provide opportunities. It can do all these things, but all of a sudden, the testing of that relationship is going to result in certain prompts that might complicate things, or it might provide opportunities, but you're going to have to pay for it, etc. And I know I've mostly been focusing on romance within games at the moment, but I want to talk about rom-coms and how the framing of these movies and shows really is important towards translating that to opportunities to frame scenes at the table. Oh, and before I forget, the NPC romance idea from Blue Rose is so fun, where basically, think about it this way, you could include this if your players are interested but maybe don't want to be the ones in the romantic relationship. If there are two NPCs that are clearly meant for one another or could be interested but are shy or what have you, playing matchmaker in an otherwise different kind of game just seems like a fun little side quest that would be interesting to explore. I've never done it, but now it's definitely on my to-do list, is create a matchmaking sort of, not mini game, but like downtime activity to make the player characters bring two NPCs together, and that could come with a lot of interesting rewards, but also, depending on how it goes, it might also make those relationships kind of more strained, or might make them interesting and might result in miscommunications and stuff like that, which is what we're going to talk about now. Rom-com framing tools come in a variety of flavors, but there's a few that really work more than others. And before I get into why miscommunication is a really big one, I do just want to say that is a fictional framing tool. At a table with your players, if you're the GM or if you are a player and you have a GM, communication is so important for these kinds of things at a table. Consent is sexy. Communication is huge. These themes in games are important to discuss not only in a session 0, but throughout a campaign of any length. Romance is definitely one of those topics that should be plotted out between the GM and any involved players to make sure opportunities are presented to hit on all of the right notes for that player's particular romantic journey, and other players are aware of what is going to be happening, so that way everybody has a chance to kind of chime in and say, that's uncomfortable for me, or what have you. Can we frame this a different way? That said, in-game, in the fiction, some of the biggest things you see in rom-coms are miscommunications, near misses, things like existing relationships. Friends to lovers is a huge trope, obviously. You have recurring themes and imagery and or phrases and things like that. So these are tools you can use when you are presenting these opportunities to your players to potentially find romantic entanglements or options for these kinds of relationships to be present in your game. I would recommend going slow. If your idea of romance at a table is roll a charisma roll, then fade to black, or even worse, give details that no one asked for because you rolled one die, that's not what we're talking about here. It should be a spark. It should be a nagging feeling. It should be, why did that interaction with that NPC affect me so much? Why can't I stop thinking about that? Oh, I don't want to be the one to go back into town and deliver this thing from the quest. What if I say something wrong? Then you build on those things that are said between them. If it's a playful NPC, be playful. If it's a stern NPC, be critical, but in a way that makes it seem like you care. Push your PC's buttons. Let it simmer. Unless we're talking Pasión de las Pasiones or Monster Hearts, in which case you probably want to go big, fast, and see what mess comes of it, because that's more about what that game's trying to do. Let these romantic relationships build over many, many sessions. Don't make it a one-session thing, unless you're spending a significant amount of downtime in an area, in which case you can say, I spend a significant chunk of my time with this other character, and you can turn it into something that develops over a longer in-game period of time and might come with a few small scenes or vignettes or things like that. So that way you can build it and provide enough detail and justification as to why these feelings are becoming what they are. Don't cheapen it and make it feel flat by just leaving it behind like one roll or anything like that. Next, let's go into some specific examples from the probably too many rom-coms I watched this month, as well as a book series that I am reading alongside my wife. And you know, we'll start there. That is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. I'm reading it. That's my opinion of it. I know I'm not the target audience, so that's fine. But a very usual rom-com sort of trope is in these books, which is miscommunication, right? Feyre is told certain things about the Fey world, and then when she's finally in the Fey world, she's told one thing, but then she finds out they're lying and there's actually another truth, and then who do you trust? And all of these different miscommunications and conversations about getting to the truth of the matter really propel the relationships that she develops throughout the course of the series. I'm not done with it. I'd say no spoilers, but honestly, if you want to talk to me about A Court of Thorns and Roses, for sure. But I think that's a big one, right? I mean, obviously, in RPGs, it's rare for GMs to think so far ahead that they may have NPCs who are misleading characters. But if that's an integral part towards a relationship that is going to be more than just one or a few sessions long, then that's an important thing to think about, is feed them the wrong information with a chance to find the right information so they can then have a follow-up interaction with that NPC and maybe call them out or see how that goes. Maybe instead of calling them out, they continue to play along with the lies they're being fed and try and catch them in a way that exposes them without having to confront them. That's an interesting way to go about it. And then all of a sudden, you're probably meeting new NPCs who are helping you get to the actual truth. And how does that relationship change? Let's talk some rom-com movies. I watched a lot of the classics this month. So let's go with When Harry Met Sally. There were many, many near misses. That is a hard thing to frame in an RPG, but I do love the idea of presenting an opportunity and then taking that opportunity away because your mission calls, your adventure, your quest calls, and the time you wanted to spend or the thing you wanted to do, you couldn't get to. Bring that character back. Give them another chance. Is it the same? Have things changed? When Harry Met Sally is also a friends to lovers story, so it's kind of one of those things where for a long time they were pretending it was just that. They're just friends and, they're dating other people, but there was always that underlying tension. Make those opportunities really, really tempting. And then maybe don't let them get everything they want out of them until the time is right. We also watched Pretty Woman, and that's a rom-com, but that's actually got a lot of interesting things, right? When we play certain games, again, I'm thinking most people out there are playing high fantasy games, and in those games, there is a wide range of what your character's background might be. I've had many games where people are playing like lower royalty or nobility, and then other games where people are street urchins, and you're going to be interacting with NPCs from all types of social statuses. So that difference, how does that manifest itself? What does that mean? And the status quo and outside perception of these two people together affecting how they feel about each other is a hard thing to overcome. Build that trust and the respect for the person, not the labels, is a really good way to frame those types of romantic relationships. Put those obstacles in their way where they're confronted with, you don't belong with this person isn't good enough for you, you're too good for this person, whatever you want to say. Have other NPCs be the foils to that, Two more that I'm just going to talk about. One is Bridget Jones's Diary, which technically breaks one of my biggest rules of movies that I hate, which is if the entire conflict could have been resolved by just having an honest conversation at the beginning. Oh, that bothers me so much, but technically it works in this one. There was a huge misunderstanding when these two characters first met, and they held that understanding of one another. They created this conception of the other person in their minds, and they held on to that throughout other very small interactions over the course of the next, I don't remember what the time scale of that movie was, but when they saw each other again, they were assuming they were the same person, but they've been changing. And not only have they been changing, the thing they initially understood about each other was not accurate, right? They've been misled from another person who's kind of in the middle of them. It's sort of a love triangle in that one, but really it's a very heavily weighed, lying kind of thing with Hugh Grant's character. But anyway, last one I'm going to talk about to maybe use some themes and framing devices for your romance in your RPGs is Sleepless in Seattle. They say a lot of things a lot of times in that movie, and I love the idea of recurring imagery or phrases. It's a sign was a big one, right? Like they're noticing these little coincidences or parallels between the two characters and where they are in their lives or things that they enjoy. Use parallels. Use scenes to highlight where if there's a void in one person's chest, give it a shape and then show the other person doing something that shows how well they would fit that shape. But they don't get the chance to act on these things. Either they're physically separated, like in that movie, or there are just, like before when we were talking about When Harry Met Sally, there are opportunities to do these things, but take away those opportunities because of reasons, whatever they have going on. Another thing that they bring up a few times is you just know. when you meet your person. It was like magic the first time I held their hands. That's super hard to capture at a table in an RPG, but maybe use a different type of device to play up a moment. If it's supposed to be special, and especially if you've discussed this with a player or your GM, maybe have that moment come with a unexpected mechanical benefit, or maybe have it generate a question that your character needs to find an answer to, and it should be not an external quest, but an internal quest. When creating characters in writing, you're supposed to give them a want and a need, and what they want and what they need should be completely diametrically opposed, or they should not be compatible, right? Getting what you want is not going to satisfy what you need. So maybe have an opportunity to play off and offer the player roads towards each of those things, and along the way the romance is going to nudge them one way or another, because if it's what they want or what they need, you can play that differently. All right, this is getting long for a mining media, so let's start to wrap this up. I do want to talk about a little bit of homework, maybe, for a mining media. One would be, go watch a rom-com or read something romantic or what have you, and think about how those character interactions could be portrayed at a table. But I also want you to think about your characters. If you are a player and not a GM, I think at some point in every table's adventures, there comes a desire for at least one player to want to have a romance subplot during a campaign. I think likely most of us have probably seen this, and more than likely, we've all seen how this could not be so great, right? I would ask that you look at your character and think about them if they were to have to be in a romantic situation. What do they like? What do they need? And maybe not know that they need? What sort of person would bring that out in them? And what sort of behaviors or what would their efforts look like if they were pursuing someone that they suddenly found themselves interested in? What if they were being pursued? How would they react? We like to think of our characters as capable people. We make them as heroes or interesting characters to go through a conflict, a plot, some kind of story. So they need to be capable, but no one is immune to being deeply changed by an unexpected connection like romance. It can come out of nowhere, and it might surprise you how differently your character might act with those types of relationships. Think about how this would affect your character in relation to their goals, to their behaviors, to their relationships with their party or friends. If you're a GM, before anything, discuss with your players if anyone's interested in this, but if they are, take a look at their PCs. Think about what kind of NPCs would represent good opposites attract type characters, or what kind of NPCs might have good complementary traits to their either strengths or weaknesses, and just let them have a chance to interact with them. Obviously, we never want to force these kinds of encounters or scenes with a player if they're not interested, but work with your players to determine what kind of character their PC might be interested in. And find ways to have them around every once in a while, so you can develop things slowly. Alright, I think that's going to be it for this episode of Mining Media. I hope this was in some way helpful, or at least has shown you a few games that you might be interested in trying out, or a new podcast you may be listening to, because I referenced a couple. But until next time, think about what you want, think about what you need, and why don't you share with me your favorite romance story? Movie, TV show, book, you name it. Give me a good recommendation.